as long as I can remember, I've never been able to escape the paranormal. Whether it be the television turning itself off at night as a child, or imaginary friends my older sister and I could both see for years. I've grown to become almost desensitized to anything out of the ordinary. Out of all the things that have come in and out of my current home, there's one being that's been there for as long as I can remember, and quite the odd one at that. For simplicity's sake, I'll just refer to him as Old Man. He's often heard walking throughout the basement, mostly in the spare living room that connects to another spare room. He's not spoken a word to any of us, but he really seems to dislike my mother's best friend, as when she lived with us for a short while, he'd bang on the laundry room walls when she was alone in there, and she'd swear up and down that he'd told her to get out. Nobody else had ever been told the same. Typically, the most that we would get was a whisper calling our names. And who knows if that was even him in the first place. So this was always perplexing to me. Personally, I think the Old Man is all right. He's been docile with my family, never moves things or bugs any of us. I've only seen him briefly here and there, but the description I have of him, it matches what everyone else in the house has seen of him. And everyone, except my mom's friend, can pretty much agree that he's harmless. When my room was in that spare room connected to the basement's living room, I'd often come home to an empty house after school and crash for a couple of hours while waiting for anyone else to come home. Sometimes I'd be so tired from staying up too late and having to get up so early that I'd fall asleep with the lights on, and in those cases, I'd wake up 90% of the time with the lights having been turned off for me. Nobody in my family ever admitted to doing it. And my parents really wouldn't have been the type to turn the lights off for me to sleep, since they found my messed up sleeping cycle and daily naps to be frustrating. With both of my siblings being gone most of the time around then, it was also unlikely that they'd lie about doing that for me. So I can only assume that it was the Old Man who had helped me out with the lights. I've always wondered if perhaps he's some sort of guardian. Yet the way he acted towards my mom's friend contradicts that, since she's by no means a bad person or deserving of that. Though I can't even say for certain that it was the Old Man who did any of that, since she never saw him when the walls were being banged on. I wonder how many of you have had similar experiences with a being acting hostile to some while docile towards others. I've been reading a lot of strange stories, so I thought this would be a good place for mine. It happened over 30 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Every summer, I spent June and July serving hard labor on Grandpa's farm, and if I never have to see another live pig, I'll die happy. I hated it there, but my opinion didn't count for much. In fact, it didn't count for fuck at all. But the point is, I was there. Grandpa needed help, and I was the only one too young to say no. It's true what they say about farming. You really do gotta wake up at 5 a.m. every goddamn day. My chore list got a little bit longer with each trip, so the summer before senior year was especially brutal. But knowing it was my last infused me with just enough strength to persevere. Admittedly, persevere is a strong word, a strong, inaccurate word, but I survived, and I never served time in a psych ward. That, my friends, is called winning. Collectively, I spent a grand total of 20 months on that farm, and at least triple that just thinking about it. In all that time, I never experienced anything unusual until the final summer. Luckily, this actually has nothing to do with farming. Only my grandpa's house, but more specifically, his basement. It was the morning of June 11th, and I was coming downstairs to breakfast when the old man's shrill curses reached my ears. I almost turned around, but that would only make things worse. Grandpa was one of those hard asses who wanted you to look at him cross so that he could beat you senseless. That's how he got his jollies. But this time, he was really mad. I could practically hear his face turning red as spit flew, and I knew that one vein would be predominant on his forehead. When I entered the kitchen, the basement door stood open, and Grandpa was at max volume downstairs, but I could also hear another sound, the sound of running water. I rushed halfway down the stairs before coming to a sudden stop. The room was flooding from a busted pipe, and the water was already 3 to 4 inches above Grandpa's ankles. I called out, but he didn't even look at me before finding the main shutoff valve. With the floodgates finally closed, Grandpa took notice of me, but he still had that look. So I quickly averted my gaze lest he interpret it as a challenge. Thankfully, he had bigger concerns at the moment, and I returned to being invisible. Once he was safely back up the stairs, I rolled up my pants and dove in. A ton of stuff was getting ruined. Random junk was floating by the steps, and dozens of boxes were half submerged. If I didn't fish them out, I would be the only one to blame later. I began placing boxes onto higher shelves as I circled the room, but in the corner, opposite the stairs, I froze at the sound of a large splash behind me. Grandpa didn't have any pets, and there's no way he returned to help. My head snapped to the sound's direction, but nothing was there. Just the same, almost calm, water surface. After several minutes of total silence, I tried to resume my duties, and I think that's what something was waiting for. The moment I bent over, something brushed past my leg. I imagine it's exactly what it would feel like if I were standing in a pool and someone swam by, except the water obviously wasn't deep enough for that to actually happen. I screamed like a girl, but Grandpa didn't return. I thought he simply hadn't heard me, but I made a break for the stairs and he was finishing his breakfast in the kitchen. He didn't seem the least bit fazed by my outburst. He didn't even acknowledge me. All he did was mutter about expensive repairs and today's pansy youth. I was too shaken up to put much thought into his exact words, but I wish I had. After a hot meal and a moment to calm down, I felt fairly foolish for panicking. With a renewed sense of false courage, I returned to the flooded basement and resumed my place in the far corner. Everything was fine. I felt ridiculous for having worried, but only for a few seconds. As I bent down to pick up the last box, a cold, bone-thin hand clamped around my ankle in a steel-tight grip. My mouth opened wide, but no scream emerged, only a soft, dry croak. I wanted to pull my leg free to run, but I was paralyzed, and the grip on my ankle grew tighter. I expected my bone to snap at any moment. Desperate, I dared to look down into the murky water, and though I can never be sure if what I saw was real or merely my own warped reflection, there was a ghastly, white, pallid face staring back at me. The eye sockets were black and hollow, the cheeks were drawn, and its mouth was frozen in a silent scream. Maybe I went into shock, or maybe I had a panic attack. Either way, I couldn't breathe. It felt like my lungs were filling with water, and I couldn't get air. I couldn't choke. I couldn't fight back. I was completely helpless, and I have no clue how long I stayed that way. I only know that eventually, Grandpa was there, holding my head above water, shaking me like a crying newborn. I wasn't standing anymore. I was lying in the water, and the old man looked every bit as terrified as I felt. We didn't speak about what happened. He helped me upstairs. We called some plumbers, and they had the basement empty by that evening. Now, if nothing else had happened, I would think that I had a fit of temporary insanity or something and move on, but not with how things turned out. Grandpa's pipes were so old that they all needed to be replaced. To do that, a lot of the walls had to be ripped open, including one of the basements. There was a body in that bitch. The police were never able to identify the remains, but it was a male, and the top half of the skull was missing. I've just never really been able to process the whole thing. Sometimes I wonder if Grandpa killed that man. He fought the plumbers every step of the way. The police talked to him for a really long time, too. They didn't leave him alone until he got a lawyer. But that doesn't necessarily mean anything, does it? The old man died about 15 years ago, and on his deathbed, I asked him if he did it. But his mind was too far gone to answer. I guess it's one of those things I'll never know, but it feels much better to share my story with people who will believe it. Thanks for that.